again. Welcome to the IBDP Extended Essay Cafe. My name is Elsa, and like you, I am also an educator. I have been associated with the field of education for 5 years, teaching, observing pedagogies, and studying the different aspects of education. As we wait for others to join, we'd love to know where you are joining us from. Please put down your names and the cities you are in right now in the chat box. Hi, Heather. Hi, Valentine. She's joining us from Croatia. Regina from Klaipeda. Matt from Bulgaria. Hi, Wanji from Philippines. We have Jesse from Mumbai. That's India. Hi, everyone. Hi, Ruth. I see that you're from Qatar. And we have Ruchi from India again. We have a lot of people from different parts of the world. We have Tuba from Karachi and Elviram from Norway. That's a nice bit of people. Yes, that's about it. So moving ahead. Toddle is currently used by 2,500 educators across 1,100 PYP and MYP schools. We have schools from all over the world, the US, Asia Pacific, Europe, and the Middle East. The program is also available in Spanish. Just like Toddle for PYP and MYP, Toddle for DP will also be a comprehensive end-to-end teaching learning solution. The platform will include features like curriculum planning and resource library, DP core modules, assessment and feedback, progress reports, student portfolios, family communication, classroom management, and streamlined authorization and evaluation. We are doing a quick walkthrough to show you the DP extended essay module today after the closing session at 12:45 p.m. GMT. Do drop into that session using the link in the chat. So I'm dropping the link in the chat. So for some of the things that you need to keep in mind, we request you to switch on your videos and put yourself on mute. Type your questions into the chat box. At various times, the speaker will ask you to pause and reflect. Use the chat feature to interact with others. While typing into the chat box, please select the Everyone option. The webinar has been developed independently from and is not endorsed by the IB. We thank our speakers for generously sharing their learnings at Toddle Extended Essay Cafe. Finally, don't forget to share your learnings from this session using the hashtag Extended Essay Cafe or EE Cafe and tag Toddle across social media. Now, on to today's agenda. In today's session, we'll be exploring extended essay guidance for psychology with our speaker, Susan. Susan is an IBDP psychology and TOK educator and is an IBDP psychology IA and extended essay examiner. She is currently an associate director for DP learning and engagement at Toddle. She has conducted several workshops on DP psychology for teachers in India and across the world. She designs lessons in ways that maximize teachers' and students' engagement. She believes that learning is rapidly evolving and teachers should adapt to changing student needs. Outside her job, Susan spends time with her 2 cats and enjoys singing, traveling, and all things food. We are so happy to have you with us, Susan. Now over to you.
Thanks, Elsa. That was so nice. That was such a lovely introduction. Welcome, everyone. So happy to have you here today. And I hope all of you are ready for a day of immersive psychology extended essay learning. I am really excited and looking forward to the discussions that we're going to have, and hopefully all the insights that both you and I will take back from this session. So I thought that before we begin our session, we could begin with a little bit of sharing and reflection. So Elsa is just going to drop the link for a Padlet in the chat. I would love for you to, let me just share my screen with a Padlet. I would love for you to share your thoughts about the extended essay on the Padlet. So the first thing that I want you to talk about is, what's the best part of the psychology EE for you? You can use the link in the chat to go ahead and see. I hope all of you are able to see my screen with the Padlet. Yeah. So what's the best part of the Psych EE for you? For me, I think the best part of the psychology EE is seeing the curiosity with which students come in with a small idea, and it grows into a 4,000 word research paper by the end of 9 months. And I think that's absolutely fabulous. So I love seeing how that small idea grows into an academic paper. Ooh, we're getting some nice responses here. The reflection is definitely a plus as well. I totally agree that they can choose a topic that they are interested in learning about. Yeah, I like that freedom as well. Expands your knowledge as well. I completely agree with this. And reflections. That's great. Any others? What else do you guys think? What is the best part of the psychology EE? I actually also like that the psychology EE, there's such a nice and smooth transfer of skills from what we study in class to the extended essay, right? Like we teach them critical thinking, we teach them how to evaluate studies, and it so beautifully comes across in the extended essay. So that critical thinking, and it also helps them to hone their critical thinking skills. So by the end of doing a Psych EE, I feel like naturally their responses in paper 1 and paper 2 also do improve, which is quite nice. Okay, if we have, we have quite a few more. A chance to explore the principles and concepts in more real world issues, absolutely. The process and students' reflection. Reflection seems to be a hit with quite a few of you. Development of their skills and the change in how the student able to talk about that topic from beginning to end. Absolutely. Helps the student introspect into their interests. Yeah, that's so good. This is great. For those of you who've shared on this, maybe we can go on to the next one also. So now looking at what the best part is, what is the hardest part of being a supervisor for a psychology extended essay? What do you think? To guide the students focus on the RQ, formulation of RQs, exactly. Struggling with critical thinking, reflections, waiting for marks. That's always a nail-biting adventure for sure. Keeping them from looking too broadly and not using proper sources. I think not using proper sources is definitely a roadblock that I have also faced, because students love reading opinion articles and taking out information from there. But if it's a psychology extended essay, then we need relevant sources and good sources. Effectively treating the topic within 4,000 words using appropriate number of studies. Absolutely. All of the criminology topics, there's so many interesting topics. Yeah. Reading and rereading students' output, formulating the RQ, finding enough supporting or refuting studies. Sure. I agree. Students do definitely struggle with these. Any more reflections? No? Okay, great. So let's see. I'm just going to stop share and go back to my presentation. If you can see it, can you see it? Great. Okay, so let's see if we can address some of those concerns in our session today. Yeah, but thank you so much for sharing. I think as we go ahead with today's session, and we are actually quite a nice and intimate number. So maybe going forward, we don't need to always use the chat. Maybe you guys could also unmute and ask questions as well as we go along. I think that would be nice. Yeah. So what are we looking at for today's session? So we definitely want to understand what the nature of an extended essay is in psychology. We want to look at examples of topics to give you ideas of what are good areas of exploration in psychology. We can explore methodologies and approaches to topics and research questions. We will definitely be doing a very, very thorough unpacking of the assessment criteria. And once we're done with the unpacking of the assessment criteria, we're going to put that to practice and grade an exemplar together. Yeah, so that's what we have planned for you. So I'm sure all of you know this, but just to go over the basic points of what an extended essay in psychology looks at, it's an investigation, an in-depth investigation into a topic of choice within psychology. It helps students to develop their skills in research, analysis, evaluation, and communication. It helps them to increase their understanding of behavior from a psychology POV. And this is a point to note, and it's there specifically mentioned in the guide. The extended essay is quite nice in that there's a lot of freedom, but if you have a student who is not a psychology student and is attempting the extended essay, the IB does ask us to tread with caution because it could compromise the level of achievement unless you're absolutely sure that the student has a lot of background knowledge and understanding of the topic that they have chosen. If you have a student who's not that well read, then maybe dissuade them from picking up psychology as their extended essay subject. What do we know about double dipping for psychology? Okay, so for us, actually, double dipping shouldn't be that much of an issue because the internal assessment is quite different from the extended essay, right? In the internal assessment, they are conducting their own research, whereas the extended essay is only secondary research. But don't let them, if there's a study that they've used in the internal assessment, don't let them use that same analysis or information that they have used in the internal assessment and put it into the extended essay, because it's definitely going to be a red flag and they could lose their diploma because of it. So they shouldn't be duplicating any work that goes for the internal assessment into the extended essay. But this in psychology, I imagine, would only be in terms of the using the same analysis or evaluation for the study that goes across both ways. This, like I just mentioned, the extended essay is very different from the internal assessment, but students must understand the difference between the two. Okay, there have been cases where sometimes students get confused and go ahead and do primary research for the extended essay as well, but that is not allowed at all. Even if it is supplementary information where they may have spoken to experts, it's just something that students can mention in their engagement or in their reflection, saying, I was able to build my knowledge by speaking to experts in the field, but it doesn't go into the appendix, it doesn't go anywhere else. So students have to understand the differences between the IA and the EE, and both students and supervisors share the responsibility for ensuring that the EE differs in intent and content and methodology and outcome from the IA. So as supervisors, we definitely do play a very important role in guiding students on these distinctions, because in case there is an issue with either the IA or the EE, then those assessments can get flagged by the IB and the student just stand a chance to lose their diploma. So it's just a few things that we do need to be mindful of. So let's look at ethical guidelines. So what do you think ethical guidelines might be in the extended essay? So because it's secondary research, we don't need to really worry about the things. If you were there in the opening session, in our opening session, then Emily did speak about ethical guidelines, right? But for us, it's only secondary research, so we don't need to worry about it so much because we're not conducting the research firsthand. But we should be very careful about choosing sensitive topics. So if the extended essay is about a topic that could be very sensitive in terms of abuse or drug addictions, if it's targeted towards minority groups and things like that, students are expected to tread with caution while going ahead with approaching these sensitive topics. And overall, as a supervisor, you should be dissuading them from choosing topics that are around these certain areas. Because as an extended essay examiner, we do have an option to flag an essay that seems to be breaching ethical guidelines in terms of sensitivity. So this is something to keep in mind as well. So Let's get into the whole process of the extended essay now. So how do students arrive at the RQ? What is this entire process that takes place that helps students go from a broad topic right to their RQ? So as you know, when the extended essay process starts in your school, you have to identify areas of interest. Okay, so areas of interest can be very broad. They can be abnormal psychology, mental health, they could be about sports psychology, but students may say, hey, this is something I'm very interested in, even if it's criminal behavior for that matter, right? So they can read up on that very broad topic, and then within that broad topic, they can start researching more specific things. So when they start reading up on it, they might be like, okay, hey, criminal behavior can be affected by maybe maltreatment in childhood, or criminal behavior can be affected by, exposure to certain variables. So when they're studying about these particular topics, they select something that's a little bit more specific, and then they get to narrow the focus and identify some clear variables. So then they can say, okay, fine, to what extent does this variable and this variable lead to criminal behavior? So start with a broad topic, let them do a little bit of research and let them have fun with it, because they go crazy when they have to do the initial research, and they'll keep buzzing about saying, oh my God, this is so interesting. I saw this on a TV show. What about this? Is this doable? Let them have a little bit of fun with it and run wild, but rein them in a little bit when you feel that they have something that's very interesting, and ask them to be a little bit more specific about that topic. And once they've notified or identified these key variables, they can start beginning the framing of the RQ. It has to be noted over here that the framing of the RQ is something that should be purely done by the student, and it should not be as a suggestion that comes from the supervisor. It has to be an independent piece of research from start to finish for students. So we can guide them and we can tell them, hey, this is too narrow or this is too broad, but framing the RQ should not be part of the guidance that we give students. Yeah. So now that we know what this process of going from a broad topic to the RQ is, let's look at what are some examples of topics and research questions, and let's see how this process actually takes place. So let's look at this one. So the broad topic could be something like childhood trauma and criminal psychology. Okay, so if you had to, if they were doing some reading about it, the approach would involve looking at the impact of different types of maltreatment or trauma in childhood that led to it. So it could be physical, it could be sexual, neglect, and all these variables could be explored in terms of criminal behavior. So once a student has identified these variables, they can then come to the research question, to what extent does childhood maltreatment lead to criminal behavior in adulthood, right? When we're going further and when we're unpacking the criteria, we'll see how, even though this may seem like, wait, this is a lot going on, we'll see how in the introduction, students can actually narrow down or identify or justify why they have chosen the variables they have chosen to go ahead with the research in their extended essay. Let's take one more topic. Yeah, causes of alcoholism. Okay, to what extent do genetic factors play a role in the onset of alcoholism in young adults? Okay, so I had a student who had tackled this research question, and he ended up getting an A for it. It was a very thorough paper, but his paper involved looking at pedigree and twin and adoption studies, and tied those results to genes and alcoholism. And as counter arguments, he also looked at gene environment interaction. So is it only genes that play a role in alcoholism, or are there research studies to show that, hey, genes don't play a role? And then if genes don't play a role, then what are the factors that could be playing a role in causing alcoholism in young adults? Notice how his research question also has identified a demographic. So that's also another specific focus that you can make over here. So young adults means that most of his research also looked at that specific age group, which also made it quite nice. And his evaluations were a little bit more holistic, and he was able to think more about the research studies that he had considered. And let's look at one last one, the effect of social media use on anxiety. Okay, so here the student explored different factors that played a role in the effect of social media. And this is actually quite fun. When you read this, initially you're like, okay, how would you tackle it? But then she looked at the time spent on social media, the number of social media portals that were used by the participants, sleep quality, age, FOMO, which is popularly known as fear of missing out, right? So she looked at a bunch of these variables and she tied each of these to social media and how they had an effect on anxiety in adolescents and young adults. Over here also, they have identified a particular age group or a demographic, which was quite nice. And I think this essay also got an A grade. So I hope that this is able to give you an idea of how you can go from a broad topic and how the extra reading will help students to identify all these different factors that link social media to anxiety, and then help them to come up with this research question. Okay. The interesting or the good thing about psychology also is that, initially they might come up with a research question and they have decided that, okay, this one factor makes a lot of sense, or these two factors make a lot of sense. But when they begin writing, they're like, hey, a lot of the research also points as this third factor. And maybe this is a lot more important than one of the factors that I've considered. They do have the freedom to change that. So it's not like once the research question is decided, it's set in stone. If you feel like too much time is not lost, and if you think that the student is capable to rework those parts of their essay to include another factor, then by all means do encourage them to do so. Yeah. Let's go ahead. So what is a research question then, right? It should definitely be in a question format, and the question should be specific. Okay. So for example, if we're looking at to what extent do interventions play a role in helping with depression? That's a very broad question. If you're using interventions, don't just say interventions, identify the interventions. If you're saying therapy, identify the therapies. And if it's the approaches, for example, don't go for all three approaches. Don't say to what extent do biological, cognitive, and sociocultural factors play a role in the onset of depression. There's no way a student can cover that within the scope of 4,000 words. Which brings us to the next question. Can the research question give you an idea of whether this question can be answered within 4,000 words? If instinctively you feel like, no, this is way too broad, then tell the student to remove one of the approaches that are being considered in the research question and then to go ahead with it. But otherwise, it's just like, they'll have a lot of information and knowledge in the paper, but they'll lose out on critical thinking. They might lose out on so many other criteria and indicators while addressing this research question. And once they've chosen the research question, they have the freedom to use the introduction to explain the context of that RQ and justify why it warrants research. What is the importance of knowing the information that comes along with this research question? Okay, we will be going into the research question much more in detail when we're looking and breaking down the criteria. So for now, this is just what we're going to be looking at. So this is one of my favorite things, how to make literature review easier for students. Okay, so we have, Elsa can just drop the link of the patent into the chat again in case you've lost the link. But I have a very nice resource, a couple of resources that we can look at that can help us make this literature review process easier for students. Because for the extended essay, they have to read journal articles, which they might not be familiar with doing. And reading a journal article for the first time can be a very intimidating process. So as a supervisor, maybe the first time, read a journal article with them. And if any of you have access to InThinking, John Crane has this amazing resource that teaches students how to read journal articles under the extended essay tab itself. So it shows them how to go step by step, teaches them that they don't need to go into detail into all the sections, but there are certain bits that they can read to get a good idea of the paper, and that'll let them then see whether this research is worthy of being in their extended essay or not. So I would highly recommend that if you have access to InThinking, then get your hands on this resource and share it with your students because it'll help out a lot. What else can you do? Okay, help them to sort out their studies. So I have one resource over here that I'd love to share with you. It's called Skeletons for Papers. So I make a skeleton which includes a bunch of things that students need to decode about each research paper that's there on the Padlet. It's called a skeleton, and it'll be the title, the name of the author, what was the procedure, what was the sample. And it also, so when the student is reading the paper, they can make notes about each of these points in this skeleton. And then once they begin writing the paper, they don't need to go through the effort of going through the paper all over again. They just get to refer to their notes and then transfer their notes right into the extended essay, which makes it so much easier for them. It also teaches them like good note-taking habits, and that'll come in handy for the IB as well as when they go to university. So I'll quickly stop share soon once I'm done with these and then show you how to go there, right? oftentimes we also find that students might hit a roadblock when they're searching for research studies, right? So they'll be like, oh, I could only find 2 studies, or I could only find 3 studies, and I'm not able to find anything else. One hack that works really well is to look at the research studies that they already have and make the students go through the references of that research paper and underline the titles of papers that they think are still relevant to their RQ, and then use that to find more papers. Okay, the second one is very highly debated, but if all of you are familiar with Sci-Hub, and I don't know if you are, but Sci-Hub is basically, I mean, the lady who started Sci-Hub had only one motive. She said academic resources should be free and available to all. And she said that it's not technically unethical, because if you're making it free and available, it just leads to so many more citations for those authors. So why should academic papers be paid for? So Sci-Hub is basically a website where if it's a paid resource, and you can just drop in the link of that resource into Sci-Hub and it opens it for you. So if students find that it's difficult for them to find papers, or if they're locked, or if they don't have the means to access them, one way is obviously to ask the EE coordinator to help out, or their supervisor to help out. But in case that's not a good way to go, or they can't do it that way as well, they can always go to Sci-Hub. And of course, another way to make literature review easier for them is to help them practice critical thinking and argument writing. So the critical thinking and argument writing, anyway, we're doing in class, right? When we're teaching them how to write their extended response questions, both in paper 1 and in paper 2. So those should be fairly easy. So let me just stop my share for a quick second and show you what this skeleton resource looks like. Oops. There we go. I hope you can see it. Is it visible? Yeah. So that's it. So every time they open a research paper, let them work on a Google Doc and identify all these things. So this is the title, this is the author, this is the method. And then let them also look at the discussions in the papers and the evaluations and write their own. And of course, have them look at the paper, see what the claim is, and see if they can find a counter argument for it as well. Because when we're discussing Criterion C, you will see that a counter argument is a must in an extended essay. So if they can begin identifying counter arguments right in the beginning itself, it helps that flow of writing the argument become a lot more organic, which is great. And also when they do this, have them link the conclusion of that paper to the research question as well. So usually what my students do is, once they're done with their literature review and they have all their studies summarized like this, just to make the process of structuring their paper easier, they also use a Google Sheet to put down all these details, and then they see what are the common elements between these studies, and that helps them to form the subtopics in their extended essay as well. Because usually students also struggle with, okay, fine, I have an introduction, I have a body, and I have a conclusion, but that's not enough. You need to have subtopics within the body of your extended essay to differentiate between the different claims and arguments that you are making. So this helps them to do that. So they can also go ahead and make a table that will help them organize their research and then structure the different subtopics in their paper. Let's go back to the deck. Yep, here we go. Okay, so let's do a full nice deep dive into interpreting the extended essay criteria. Okay, what I'll do is, for each of the criteria that we're looking at, we'll go over what the IB rubric is. And I've also created a checklist for all of you that you can use with your students. So we'll go over the rubric, and then we'll also look at the checklist and see how you can also guide your students accordingly. And the checklist is on the Padlet, don't worry. So you can use it. Obviously, goes without saying, make a copy of it, and then you can share it with your students going forward, right? So what does the focus and method criterion look like? Yeah, so the focus and method criterion has 3 indicators. Okay, the topic is communicated accurately and effectively. The research question is clearly stated and focused, and the methodology of the research is complete. So as an extended essay examiner, one of the tips that's told to us is that the focus and method is something you can determine in the beginning itself. So you start by looking at the reference list or the works cited that the students have put at the end of the essay. Read all the titles that are there and see, wait, are all these titles, do they seem like they're answering the research question, or do they seem like irrelevant sources? Right? So for a good extended essay, we always say you need to have at least good, relevant 8 to 10 studies that go right into the, that should be there in the work cited. Apart from that, if they have other things like, opinion pieces and things like that, it's okay. But the main, there should be at least 8 to 10 studies that go right in the beginning. So when you're saying the topic is communicated accurately and effectively, this is your introduction, essentially. So you're explaining the research topic. Okay, you're talking about the focus of the paper as well. So even at the end of the introduction, it's a good practice to tell students to outline what their paper is going to look like. Literally, like how we do in the ERQ. This paper is going to look at the effect of so and so and so and so by looking at the arguments, blah, da, 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 da. So you can map out what the paper is going to look like, which gives the examiner a good idea of what to expect when it comes to the paper, right? Then the second one is about the research question being clearly stated and focused. This we can talk about just in terms of what we just discussed, right? About the research question. So it's clear it addresses an issue of research that is appropriately connected to the discussion in the essay. So when you're talking about appropriately connected to the discussion in the essay, look at the essay and see, has the student veered off at any point of time and spoken about anything else other than what the RQ is asking? So if that is the case, then the student will go on the lower mark band. So it's very important that as a supervisor, you continuously keep guiding the students and telling them that, hey, don't do this section, or this might not be appropriate for the extended essay. Stick to what your RQ is and only evaluate or discuss those points. And then we have the methodology of the research. So over here, if we look at this criteria, this is just looking at an appropriate range of relevant sources. So when you look at the work cited with the student, have they taken relevant sources, or are there a lot of opinion pieces? Of course, avoid things like, HuffPost, BuzzFeed, Wikipedia, WebMD. None of these are relevant sources or reliable sources for that matter. So don't let them use any of those. Let them use relevant sources for their definitions and concepts. But the works cited should definitely have thorough research papers, journal articles that the students are using. And is there an evidence of effective and informed selection? So when you read these titles, you will know whether the students have selected their studies appropriately or not. Okay, so let's see if we can go on to the checklist and see what focus and method would look like in the paper. Oh gosh, I wish I didn't have to stop and start screen share every time I did this. But it's okay. Right? So let's look at focus and method. So there's a clear identification of the research topic to be investigated. There is a context that's given around the research topic. By the way, when there's context, students shouldn't waste time going into the history of the topic. Okay, that's not needed in a psychology extended essay. Maybe they can give, a couple of lines, but there's no need for the introduction to go into a huge history of what the mental disorder was considered before, what it's looking at now. Not needed. A context just needs to be what it's like in a real world scenario right now and how different people approach it and so on and so forth. So you can explain the purpose of studying this topic and use specific, clear, and appropriate vocabulary while doing this. And so now coming to the research question, this is a nice checklist for that as well. So it's clearly stated and well formatted. It's narrow. It fits within the 4,000 word essay limit. It allows for analysis and evaluation. It's not a description, right? So, and it shouldn't also be like a yes or no question. No. So can CBT help, individuals who are suffering from depression? That's a yes or no question. It should allow for some scope of argument, right? Must be one single question, of course. Doesn't need to specify a demographic, but if you feel that it helps the student narrow down their focus and gives them some attention and, what's the word? Helps them to focus on a particular area, then they can do this. And it's simple and easily understandable with clearly defined variables of interest. So like I said, so if it's talking about interventions or therapies, identify those in the RQ itself. Don't leave it vague. Let it be specific. And coming to the methodology part of the focus and method, the type and amount of research undertaken should be very clear. So a clear number of research studies and using a range of reliable sources. So it should be peer-reviewed academic resources for sure. It should not be opinion pieces or just, Psychology Today magazine articles or something. Those can give the students some context of how to form their argument, but those should not be the main focus in the entire extended essay. Okay, so any questions about the focus and method? Are we good? Okay, great. I can see a note from Elsa, but I'm not sure I know how to do this, Elsa. Can you guide me?
Yes, sure. So when you're clicking in the share screen option for Zoom,
Yeah.
you'll get an option with all the windows showing up that you have open. So just press on Shift and select the ones that you want to share.
Okay, cool. Got it. So wow.
And then you can just browse between.
So can you see?
Yes.
Okay. Lifesaver. Thank you so much, Elsa. Okay, so this is focus and methodology. So I see a question in the chat. Do students need to give a range of year for the studies they have chosen? No, they don't need to give that. Actually, that's one of the rules that we don't have in psychology. I think econ and maybe global politics have a 5-year or a 10-year rule or something like that when it comes to selecting research or topics, but we don't have that. So you can pick studies from, any time period, as long as it's a good academic research paper that lends to the argument, it's totally fine. Yeah. So let's move on to Criterion B, knowledge and understanding. This is also for 6 marks in the extended essay. So in this criterion, we're basically looking at whether knowledge and understanding are demonstrated and whether the use of psychological terminology and concepts is good. Okay, so here we're looking at the application and the understanding of the study. So if you look at Criterion A, it only looked at the selection of the sources. Here we're trying to see if students were able to understand the sources and explain them appropriately, and that's what adds to the knowledge and understanding criterion. Okay, so the knowledge of the topic or the discipline or the issue is clear and coherent, and the sources are used effectively and with understanding. And of course, psychological terminology is to do with psychology specific concepts that the students can actually define in the introduction and then keep referring throughout the extended essay as well. But using psychological terminology is definitely a must. Okay, so what does this look like on our checklist? So the research is appropriate, well explained and understood. Defining key terms in the introduction is a good practice. It explains arguments in terms of their relevance to the RQ. Incorrect use of terms can lead to students losing their marks. Okay, so even though ecological validity is something that would be considered under Criterion C, students can also lose their marks in Criterion B if they've used this evaluation incorrectly. So, and really, ecological validity is one of those terms that is frequently misunderstood, and students seem to use it as a blanket term to explain anything and everything, but that shouldn't be the case. So even while using terms of evaluating studies, they should be very clear to be specific and accurate about it. Goes without saying that proof has to be avoided in psychological arguments, extended essays, even in our papers, right? Paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, we don't use the term proof because that's not how studies in psychology are conducted. Psychology specific terminology and vocabulary is accurately used consistently throughout the essay, and avoiding too many quotes or paraphrasing too close to the study. This is also something that has to be considered. Sometimes students take the easy way out, where they take quotes from the research studies and put it in their paper, and they would say that, okay, but I put the name of the researcher, so haven't I cited it? Isn't that okay? Maybe in a few places, 1 or 2 places in the paper, it's okay if it's a line or 2. But if it's going to be chunks and chunks that have been quoted, then this is definitely a red flag for academic honesty for the examiner. And the extended essay can definitely get flagged for academic misconduct. So this is something that students need to be mindful of, and you can also be mindful of while guiding them. Okay. Any questions for knowledge and understanding? No? Okay, great. Let's move on to the next one. It's the largest one, right? And the most important one, 12 marks for critical thinking. That's crazy. But it's actually not difficult to achieve this target once the student has the argumentative writing style down. I think it's fairly easy. So what are the three indicators that we're looking at when it comes to Criterion C? So the first one is the application of the research. The second one is to do with analysis. And the third one is to do with discussion and evaluation. So when we're talking about application of the research, we're talking about how the student has used the studies. Okay, so did the student use the studies in a way that led to the framing of the argument? Was it applied correctly, consistently throughout the paper? Is something that needs to be considered over here. Okay. For example, if it's a question about therapies, okay, is so-and-so therapeutic intervention good? So for example, is pharmaceutical intervention good while treating depression? If the question over here is about the cost of the pharmaceutical intervention, okay, it's poorly applied, or if the student is evaluating it by saying the cost, because we're talking about the effectiveness of the drug, so cost shouldn't actually figure over here, right? So the application of the study is something that's very important that needs to be considered. When we're coming to analysis, okay, we're looking at whether the student was able to explain what the results of the study were. So a good way to transfer skills from the classroom to the extended essay is when I tell the students about how they write their short answer questions. So if you look at the rubric for the SAQ, the last line of the rubric says that the student was able to explicitly link the results of the study to the question, right? That's the same thing that I asked them to do over here. It's not just important to state what the results are, but what do they mean? And how do they answer the research question? So there have to be conclusions to individual points or claims that students are making throughout the extended essay. Okay, and we look at the checklist to see how further to actually do this. And the last indicator is discussion and evaluation. So over here, when we're talking about evaluation, it is the strengths and limitations of the research that have been considered in the paper. Okay, that's one definite way to go about it. The evaluation is also great, and the discussion is also great when students are able to offer counter arguments. Okay, like we spoke about earlier, counter argument is definitely a must. One point for us to note when we're talking about counter arguments is that counter arguments are not alternative explanations. So for example, if we're talking about pharmaceutical interventions for treating depression, a counter argument can't be that, okay, CBT is also really good. We're not saying other factors are good. If it's a counter argument, there has to be a study that says the pharmaceutical intervention was not helpful in treating a depression. So that's a very important point, and most students tend to lose their marks when they offer alternative explanations instead of counter arguments when it comes to Criterion C. Right? The reasoned argument is well structured and coherent, and the research has been critically evaluated. So these are the other few points that need to be considered in Criterion C. So let's look at what Criterion C would look like on our checklist. So when we're talking about application of research, we're talking about relevant and appropriate research and how it's applied while building the argument. We're also talking about whether the research is clearly linked to the RQ. Right? So if we're talking about pharmaceutical interventions, like I said, and we're trying to answer the question whether they're effective or not, but the student has a lot of studies that are talking about CBT and how it's also effective, then it's not relevant research. And the student is going to lose marks for this particular band in this criterion, right? And we have how do the studies chosen add value to the RQ? Are they answering it? So these are the things that need to be considered. Under the analysis indicator, we're looking at the results of the studies and whether they're explained and linked to the RQ. That's one of them. The other one is making informed conclusions. So students will have many subtopics that are there throughout the extended essay. At the end of every subtopic, the student should be able to offer a conclusion about everything that was discussed. So suppose there were 3 studies that were discussed in a particular subtopic. Don't let the subsection end after the 3rd study is over. There should be a mini conclusion that summarizes and draws inferences from the results of those 3 studies. And then in the conclusion, all these mini conclusions can be put together to frame your final answer. You know, if it's a to what extent, then yes, it's to a very large extent. So in that way, making these mini conclusions throughout the paper is very important, and making these informed conclusions. And coming to the last part, which is your discussion and evaluation. So discussion and evaluation have to take place throughout the paper. One approach that is taken by a lot of students is to have a subsection that discusses all the studies and then to have another subsection that evaluates them. Don't let them do that. Okay, this will take away from Criterion C for sure in terms of critical thinking, and it will also take away from D because it's a poorly structured paper. If they're going to evaluate the study right after the study has been explained, it adds to the argument, and it will definitely give the examiner a good idea of how the student was able to approach the topic. But having a separate topic just for evaluation of studies is definitely not an ideal approach. Consider the implications of the results. So what are the global implications of the results? You need to have a more global perspective, not just about that particular study, but also how it applies to the topic as a whole. Look at areas of uncertainty, limitations of animal research, such as an example, but limitations of research in general also, right? And looking at relevant evaluative points. So like I said, if you're talking about whether pharmaceutical interventions are effective, then it's not a good thing to have an evaluation saying it's expensive. That doesn't add to whether the drug is effective or not. It's an irrelevant evaluation. So it's very important for them to have relevant evaluation points and not just general statements about sample or generalizability. And the thing about general statements about sample and generalizability is the fact that it gets repetitive throughout the paper. So students will just have these 2 or 3 points where they evaluate the papers, and then throughout the paper, it's the same thing on and on and on. And then they've lost marks in Criterion C all over again. Like I said, holistic evaluations at the end of every section is also very helpful, and counter arguments should be present. So not alternative explanations, but research to refute the claims that have been made. Yeah. Any questions about Criterion C? No? Okay, let's carry on to oh yeah, before we go on to Criterion D. So this is why this research is such an important part of the Psych E, because if the research is not appropriately done for the Psychology E, students are going to lose marks in both Criterion A, B, and C. So in A, if they've not selected their sources properly, then they're going to lose out marks over there. So it's about the quality and the number of appropriate sources, right? In B, it's about how well they understood it. So even if they have a good selection of sources, but they've not understood it well, then they're going to lose marks over here. And in C, it's about how they've applied that research. So this selection of research process and going through the understanding and the application of it is something that students have to do very carefully, which is why I like to do that skeleton activity with them. You know, because when they look at each study individually and make a summary of it, it gives them such a clear picture of how and where it will fit in their extended essay and how they want to structure their argument. And let's go on to Criterion D. This is an easy one. This students can easily get a 4-on-4 in this section, and they just have to be mindful about a few things, right? So when we're saying that the presentation is good, and this is the only indicator that's there in Criterion D, we're talking about the structure of the paper being appropriate. So like I said, if they have all the studies in one part of the essay, and if they have all the evaluations in another, the structure of the essay, they're going to lose out on the structure of the essay. So they should be able to appropriately structure the paper. Okay, layout considerations are present and applied correctly. Even the way that they make paragraphs, you know, can also come in the presentation. And the structure and the layout support the reading, understanding, and evaluation of the extended essay. So what are the things that we need to keep in mind when we're looking at Criterion D? There are certain sections that are a must for every extended essay in psychology, actually all of them. But you have to have a table, you need to have a title page. And it goes without saying that the title page should not have any personal identifiers of the student or the school, not at any point of time. There also needs to be a contents page, an introduction, a body of the essay, conclusion, and references. All these are a must. So when we're looking at the references, they should be alphabetized no matter which referencing style and format students are going for. Okay, both in APA, in MLA, in Chicago, all of them, they're all alphabetized. You should also do a check with the students when they're submitting the essay to see whether the in-text citations in the paper match what the works cited that have been mentioned at the end of the paper. So let them do a cross-check and see. So let them look at it when they're reading their paper for a final check. If they come across an in-text citation, let them go to their works cited and see whether it's been cited. So if they find that, hey, there are 3 extra things in my works cited that have not been cited in text, let them remove it. They may have referred to it and they can make a separate section called works referenced, because at the end of the day, you know that your students may have referred to like 20 plus resources, and this is their final work, which has 12 good pieces of research, right? So if it's something that they read and they referred to, but it's not made it to the final paper, you can have a separate section that says works referenced. But this making sure that the in-text citations match the works cited is very important, and vice versa. Okay. Yeah, then there should be clear paragraphs. So the readability should definitely be there. And students can also connect the separate paragraphs and sections in the essay. So instead of having static paragraphs and sections, try and link all the sections. So maybe a nice way to do it is once a section is over and you start the next section, have one sentence that links it. So, you know, saying that unlike so-and-so factor, which said that it leads to criminal behavior, there are other factors that make sure that it will not lead to criminal behavior. So make linking sentences between the sections to improve the flow and the readability of the extended essay. And this is exactly how they can also practice argumentative writing. The paper should be double spaced. There should be consistent citations throughout the paper. This is also actually one thing that a lot of students mix up. There, more often than not, there is a mix up between an MLA citation and an APA, between in-text citations and the work cited. And then again, you know, the paper can get flagged for referencing irregularities. So this is something that students should be mindful of, and even you can guide them as they go along writing. Avoid footnotes. It's something that's given in the guide also. It's something that a lot of chief examiners also recommend. So don't use footnotes, and especially because students use footnotes as a hack to put in information when they cross their word count. You know, and examiners are told very clearly not to read footnotes if they have anything other than a citation. So let them avoid footnotes altogether. Page numbers should be there. And like I said, no personal identifiers on the extended essay at all. Yeah, I think we have one question in the chat. Would students lose mark for using 1.5 instead of double spacing? No, they're not going to use marks instead of 1.5 instead of double spacing. It's just that double spacing is a standard format. That's it. So you can stick to it, but definitely don't let them single space their paper. It should look, this is a practice for them to write a thorough academic paper, which they will be doing as they go on to uni as well. So let them practice that from now itself. Okay. And our last and final criteria that we have, which is Criterion E on engagement. Okay. So this is for 6 marks. So this is a very interesting part of the extended essay for most of us to read, because it gives you an insight into what the process was. Of course, it's nice and interesting, but the reason that the IB had to introduce it was because there was a lot of evidence of ghostwriting for research papers among students. So the engagement criterion was introduced as a way for an examiner to see how the student was building on their extended essay right from the nascent stages of an idea right till they submitted their paper. Okay, so when we're saying there's a one indicator for this criterion as well. So reflections on decision making and planning are evaluative and include reference to students' capacity to consider actions and ideas in response to setbacks. So over here, the setbacks that we're talking about shouldn't be general setbacks. It should usually be setbacks in terms of their research. So, if it's the fact that they had to rework their research a little bit, if it's the fact that they were not able to find enough studies, what did they do and how did they go about it, right? So a high degree of intellectual and personal engagement with the research focus and process of research, talking about intellectual initiative, creative approach, and the student's voice. So this is where they get to say why they're passionate about this particular topic. Okay, so that's the first reflection, should ideally talk about that, and the rest of it should talk about what their research approach is. One handy tip from John Crane also was that each reflection should focus on the different aspect of their extended essay. So don't have them cram all the challenges and how they solved it into each reflection, but they can actually plan it by saying, okay, fine, maybe the first reflection was about how they found it challenging to find the sources. The second reflection could be about how they found it tough to structure their arguments and how they overcame that. And the third reflection can be their own maybe sense of achievement after having finished a 4,000-word research paper and how they were able to or not able to stick to deadlines and so on and so forth, right? But it has to be personal, it has to show good decision making, and it definitely should have student voice in it. Yeah, so before we go into that, let's just look at the engagement. Okay, so 500 words or less. Usually with my students, I have them do, either 150, and 200, or 100, 300. But I'd like to leave the most number of words for the last reflection, because that's the culmination of the entire research process, so they will have a lot to say, and you would have discussed so much with them in your viva voce that it gives them a lot of opportunity to discuss that in that final reflection. So there should be personal interest that's evident in the reflections. It should be written about learning relevant to the student research, like I said, and not just learning in general. Problems and issues and challenges and how they were tackled. So it demonstrates growth. If there are strong reflections, focus on the student's research journey. You can also actually use IB terminology in the reflection. So students are saying that they were able to improve on their research skills or their communication skills or their thinking skills using the extended essay. That's also really nice. And examiners would also look at that as a good amount of growth. And yeah, you should get a sense that a student has been intellectually curious and creative. And even though the supervisor's comment does not add to the grade, it definitely gives the examiner an idea of what the process was. Okay, so always be, I'm always kind in my supervisor comments. You don't need to give negative statements, but be honest about what the process has been. And if the student found something difficult, then always give a solution. So they were able to overcome it by doing so and so thing. And it does give an examiner a good idea of what the work that has been conducted by the student has been so far. So this is from the IBO. They said choosing, like I just said, choosing a single aspect of the research journey to explain and evaluate in each reflection is a good approach rather than trying to address all aspects within each reflection. Okay. Any questions about any of these criteria or how to go about them? No? We're looking good? Great. So we can actually go on to our exemplar grading session. Are you able to see my Padlet or is it not showing? It's showing? Okay, great. So if you look at the Padlet, and Elsa will just drop the link in the chat. Okay, we have an exemplar over here to grade. So what we're going to do is I want you guys to go through the exemplar. Okay, grade it. Of course, 4,000 words is a lot for you to read, so you don't need to go into detail and read every single word, but get a gist of what the student is trying to say in the exemplar. And since we've made the effort to go through all the criteria in so much detail, when you're going through the exemplar, in your group, pick out one example of how the criterion was demonstrated in that exemplar. So you can even highlight it however you want to do it. Just show, okay, this is an example of focus. This was an example of knowledge and understanding. This was a good example of critical thinking. And in critical thinking, look at all the three indicators. Look at the, the research, look at the analysis, and look at the evaluation, because that is the most important one. So pick examples for each of the criterion when you're grading the exemplar. And then we'll come back to the main session. So you grade it as a group. You can all discuss it. Okay, put your marks down in the Padlet. So what we can do, actually, you don't need to put your marks down in the Padlet. You can just come back to the main session and we can discuss it together. And I'll show you what the student actually got, because I have the annotated version of this exemplar as well.
Susan,
Okay.
there are 2 questions.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the questions. Latest version of the EE guide was published in, and it was updated in October 2020. Yeah, this is true, Valentin. So even the one that I've got on the Padlet is, I think even after 2020, it was updated in Feb 21, if I'm not mistaken. So the version of the guide that I put in the Padlet is the latest one. Okay, and we have a few other topics. So Deepika is asking whether suicidal ideation is a sensitive topic. It is definitely a sensitive topic, especially if you feel like it's coming from a very personal space for the student. So do you think that for the student to embark on a research topic like this might hinder their progress in some way, then dissuade them from doing this? And the way they write the paper or the approach that they're taking, only you will know what approach that they're taking. So if you're taking approach that seems to be bordering on, compromising sensitivity, then dissuade them from doing it. Yeah. Okay, great. So what we'll do now is Elsa's going to put you guys into breakout rooms. So how many of us are here today? We have 19 of us. So should we have 5 people in a breakout room, Elsa? So I think that's 4 breakout rooms.
Yes.
Okay, so just refer to the Padlet. You can take the exemplar from there and you can begin grading it. And if you look at, you can either refer to the checklist while grading it, or I've also got this doc over here that says unpacking criteria, which is just, so the EE guide is very extensive, but if you look at this one PDF, then it's got just the assessment strands in it. So you can use this to grade as well. I think half an hour should be good for us, right? To go through, for you guys to discuss, and then we can come back and go through it together in the main session.
Again, there is one question about, are there any questions that we shouldn't take up for E?
No, not really. There's nothing as such about questions that you shouldn't take up for the EE. The only thing that we have been told not to take up is sensitive topics. Otherwise, as long as it comes under the realm of psychology, it's completely okay. That's not a problem. So we have that much freedom.
So I'm putting everyone into different breakout rooms of 4 to 5 participants. So
Yeah.
please join the rooms once it's open.
Great. So can we have one person from each group, let us know what your grades were? How about breakout room 1? Who did we have? Regina and Valentin, what did you guys think of the essay? Or do you not want me to call out on you? Then you can just put it in the chat.
Okay, we did not decide about the total marks. Oh, okay, I know, it's root. Yes, our marks, Criterion A 3, Criterion B 3, Criterion C 5, D 3. Yes, Valentin? Something like that. It's similar to Ruth.
Yeah.
Marks, yes.
Are we all very harsh graders? What's happening? C, 3 for Criterion C. That's quite on the lower end of things. Okay, fine, no problem. What about the other groups? You can put in your marks in the chat. And maybe then I'll share my screen and show you guys what the exemplar, the graded exemplar looks like. So Ruth has put in her grades. What about who are the other groups that we had? I think we had, so Ruth is from 2. Who do we have from 3? Evangeline, Kuldeep, Meenakshi. What did you guys decide? And 4, we have Heather, Lisa, and Ruchi. Okay, so A2, B2, C3, D2. Evangeline, you guys didn't decide on marks yet, okay? Unnecessary information. Okay, got it. Noted. So let's go back to our Padlet and see what the Annotated Exemplar looks like. Oh, it's not in the Padlet. I have to add it to the Padlet. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to do that. It is, yeah. And I'll put it on the Padlet so that you guys can also have access to it. Okay, so while it's uploading onto the Padlet, let me just show you what it looks like. So I don't know how much you guys are going to agree with this, but the essay got a 31 on 34. So it was definitely, it was an A grade essay that the student wrote. Yeah. Okay, so let's see what the annotation. So she got a 6 on A, on B, a 10 on 12 for critical thinking, a 4 on 4 for D, and of course the RPPF wasn't there, but it was a good RPPF as well. So don't be disheartened or feel bad about it. I was just telling Elsa also, one of the best things that I did or helped me become a really good extended essay supervisor was to become an examiner. And I feel like we tend to be very strict when we're grading something properly for the first time. And every year when you have to grade extended essays, you have to qualify. And every year when I qualify, my first practice essay will always be very harsh grading, and the feedback will come saying you've really harshly graded on this criteria, this criteria, this criteria. So it's just about realigning a little bit. Yeah, so let's look at what comments the examiner had put here for the essay. So it says well-written, coherent essay, description clear and focused on the research question throughout, clear evaluative points, well-researched with good use of empirical studies, right? So we can go ahead and see mostly tick marks all over the place. Context is clearly established. Points of evaluation have been noted by the examiner. There was a lot of evaluation in the paper. So Criterion C, I would imagine, is good for this student. And it was a lot of global evaluation also, you know, so it wasn't just static points of evaluation, but it was an overall holistic way of looking at it, which was quite nice. Let's see what else the examiner has down over here. Also, the references are always in place, as you can see. And we can always, we can also go into each group and see why you thought this warranted these marks to give us a better idea of how to grade an extended essay or guide them, right? So clear links to the RQ throughout. That's also definitely a good idea. It adds to analysis. It adds to focus in the paper. Okay. And I think we have an overall comment at the end. Extensive, relevant reading. No, I think this is about it. But yeah. Oh, this was also there. So this is what the RPPF looked like. And she got a 5 on 6. So this you'll be able to see when you open the Padlet, if you want to go through the RPPF. So what are some things that you feel are a discrepancy? So let's come back to what the marks are. So why did some of you think that the critical thinking should have been in the lowest mark band? What are some of the points that stood out to you, that pointed out to you that, hey, the critical thinking was not good? You can put it in the chat also. It's not a problem if you don't want to unmute yourself.
Personally, I just felt that the essay didn't focus on what it was actually questioning. I mean, I didn't read it in detail within the time frame. Like, you know, I read through it, but our group's feeling was that the research question was on how childhood attachment related to adulthood. And we felt that the essay was focusing more on attachment as adults relating to their relationship, which is why we marked it down consistently, because we didn't feel that it was focused on the question that it gave in the intro, and that the title, which was different from the research question, because obviously meta-analysis is different from childhood, And if they'd done meta-analysis, then the support and conflict sections were relevant, but the research question, which talked about childhood affecting adult behavior, these sections didn't seem as relevant as they should have been. That's why we marked it down.
Okay, fine. Okay. So even in terms, actually, yeah. So you're saying that you didn't get a time to go deep into it, but you thought that some of the sections were irrelevant. Noted. But even in terms of relationship quality, or what was the next subsection? Let me just see. Conflict and recovery. So they always tied the attachment pattern that the participants had and then saw the effect that it was happening in their adult relationship. So in that sense, maybe the relevance is definitely there. You know, that is maybe one point that I would argue. I think we had someone in the chat say something, but I've lost my meeting controls. Yeah, there. For critical thinking, not the lowest mark band, but the evaluation points are mostly listed instead of explained in depth. Okay, understood. Noted. What about why do you think the essay was low on knowledge and understanding? Because there is psychological terminology, there is a clear explanation of the, the concepts in the introduction, and the research is well understood. So wherever you see a research paper, they've always explained what the study was about. So you can see that the candidate has understood what the paper meant.
I found some reference to reliability and validity showed a real lack of understanding. And I think things like understanding validity is so important. And I felt as though this student had thrown those two terms down. And that's only one example. And I understand that.
Okay.
But I think it might, to me, it flags this overall thing of you're not really understanding the, psychological research.
Understood. Okay, so you thought the terms were used a little bit more loosely. The good news is at least you guys are not on the lenient side of things. You are being a little bit more particular. So that is a ray of hope for sure, which means you'll be guiding your students really well. So that shouldn't be a problem. Any referencing irregularities or in terms of presentation you thought where the paper was lacking? Did you think that there was an issue with that? Yeah. So what did you think was not looking good in this?
I'm more familiar with APA citation, but so this looks like MLA throughout. However, on page 6, they seem to use an APA citation with the beginning of the paragraph, despite the drawbacks, and then they cite Voling, Natero, and Larson, and then in parentheses 1998. But then it seems like throughout the essay they use MLA style with the page numbers.
Okay, that is noted. Definitely, you're right over there. That would definitely be APA instead of an MLA for sure. But again, over here, so one of the things that we have to keep in mind when we're grading extended essays is that it has to be holistically graded and we have to use a best fit approach. So if you saw with most of the indicators that we looked at, each criterion had 2 or 3 indicators. So, the student might be really good in one indicator and maybe in a mid-range for another indicator. So you have to average out your marks and use the best fit approach. So for example, if you're seeing this over here, you wouldn't straight away say cut 1 mark for it. Because if it's only one instance of it in the whole paper, then you know that, okay, fine, the student does actually know what the referencing style is and you can let it go. So it wouldn't really deter their marks in any way. That's the guidance that's given to us as examiners as well. So they always say, look at a holistic approach, don't cut down for single mistakes that might pop up here and there. So that way you can be a little bit more on the lenient side. And as you can see over here also, it's all MLA citation only, in terms of the work cited page as well. Yeah, introduction has no references. which MLA version do we use? So you can use the latest MLA version or like the one next to the latest, whichever one you're familiar with. But even between APA, like MLA 7 and 8, I think 8 is the latest one, or 9. I'm not sure if I'm not mistaken, but it shouldn't be.
It's 9. It's 9.
It's 9, right? Yeah. So it's okay. It's not like if you use 9 instead of 8, you're going to get penalized for it. What the guide says is that on your cover page, you can also indicate which citation style you've used. So you can say citation style EPA, or you can say citation style MLA 8, MLA 9, or Chicago, whichever one it is, you can indicate on the cover page to give an examiner the idea of what it is that you are doing as a student. Yeah, I think there was one more question, right? Yeah, sorry, introduction has no references. That is also something to note, I would say. So even, so examiners are asked to flag an essay if like on one entire page, there's no reference at all whatsoever. So over here, I can see that the attachment theory is referenced in terms of Bowlby and Ainsworth. The researchers are mentioned, and that can be counted as a reference. And then it goes on to explain all of that. But yeah. But these things should also be referenced, I agree. True. This is the tricky part, you know, the fact that it can be subjective. And the great tolerance for the extended essay is 4 marks. So if suppose you graded as a teacher in school and you gave it like say 30 and the examiner gives it 26 or 27, that's tolerated, that's okay. It's not a big issue. Is the title accurate as meta-analysis? What about meta-analysis on the title page? So, I mean, the examiner doesn't seem to have an issue with it. And over here in meta-analysis, in terms of looking at a bunch of research studies together, it is an innocent understanding of the term. It's just an innocent understanding, but the examiner, yeah, this is technically not a meta-analysis as well. So it's something that the examiner could have pointed out as well. But over here again, if the title is incorrect, it's not going to affect the rest of the paper. It's only going to affect Criterion D. It's not going to affect any of the other criteria. So if at all this is an issue, then Criterion D is what would get affected. But the student has got 4 on 4. So the examiner has been quite generous in that sense. Yeah. Okay. Are you able to see my deck? Or are we still on the, yeah? Great. So this is the end of our session. So we can take some questions now. If you have anything about the extended essay in general. I've also left a tab on the Padlet where you can put in if you want to check validity of your research questions. You know, so we don't have to take them up right now, but if at any point of time you have any doubts, then you can definitely put them there, and it's open to all of us indefinitely. So I can keep responding to you over there as well. Are you able to see the deck, or you're seeing the
Exemplar that's showing?
Sorry?
The candidate marks report is showing.
Oh, okay, fine. So let me just reshare. I think maybe I didn't. Yeah, that's it. Any questions? And if you have any questions, I can also create one more section on the Padlet for questions. You can put them down over there and all of us can kind of respond to it going forward. You know, we can all help each other out.
Hey, Susan, can I go ahead with a question?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, I just have the most basic question, but I think I just wanted
Question
to
is basic, don't worry.
Yeah, so I just wanted to understand the Turnitin reports. So, you know, when you look for the plagiarism and all, and, you know, it like asks you to exclude the sources and it asks you to exclude certain words and everything. So the number that we give is 5, probably 5 words of exclusion, right? Something like that. And then when we go into the sources, exclude sources. So now my doubt is that, like how you mentioned in one of the criteria that, you know, to like ensure the academic honesty, if the student has written something in quotes, right? Okay. But then they are not supposed to do it so many frequently, right? But
Yes.
then what like I had noticed is when the child had done it, and if I exclude the sources, so
Yeah.
then that quoted part gets excluded. So I'm not able to understand what are we really checking for plagiarism there, because if the source is excluded, the plagiarism score is coming down. But
Yeah.
I don't feel that the child has written it in their own words. Like,
Correct.
so how do we do that?
So see, even if the sources is excluded in your Turnitin report, when as a supervisor you are guiding them, you are able to see that big chunks of the essay are put in quotes. So number one, discourage your student from doing that. And even for an examiner, it's not like the essay comes to you with a Turnitin report on the side. It's when we see red flags like this, when the language is over sophisticated, or if there's a long list of resources that have not been cited, or if there are a lot of quotation marks, then we raise a flag for an essay. So it won't necessarily be, so don't take the Turnitin result as an absolute number. You have to look at it in conjunction with the paper and see whether it's matching or not. And then at the end of the day, for you as a supervisor, it's your estimation of how much the student has worked, because you have worked with them for 9 months. So at the end of it, if you know the student hasn't worked and you're seeing a perfectly well turned out essay at the end of 9 months, then it's a cause of concern for you, and you should bring it up with the student and with your EE coordinator for sure. So don't take that Turnitin as an absolute, is what I would say.
Okay. And would there be any percentage that we have to take into account for the
No. Yeah, so don't look at it as a percentage also. So even with Turnitin reports, what I used to do is, if there was an entire paragraph that came up as plagiarized, so if there was a chunk of 3 or 4 sentences that came up as a club together, that it's come from another source, then I would tell the student after the first draft that you'll have to rework these sections because it's showing up as plagiarized. And even if it is cited, it doesn't mean that they can copy paste it from there and put it over here, right? They still have to paraphrase it and put it in their own words. So that's the important thing. So even if the number is say 20%, but it's coming like scattered all across the paper, it's okay. But the moment it's a chunk that's coming up as plagiarized, that's when you need to definitely point it out to the kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just a last question. So
Yeah.
what is the use of us doing the excluding sources in that report?
What is the use of us doing the what session? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
So there is an option of excluding sources, right? So then, like you said, that if so suppose a major chunk is showing highlighted, it is marked, but then when I exclude the source, it goes away. So I'm not able to understand that part. So if you can just throw some light on that.
So when you're saying that it goes away, are you saying that it's not taking to a legitimate source?
No. So let's say when I do show the report, so it is showing me that 10% of this is plagiarized, let's say.
Correct.
But then when I select it, filter it, and I exclude the sources, then that 10% goes away. It's not showing me again. So what does that mean? Like, does that mean that the plagiarism would still be there, right? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Personally, this has never happened to me, so I'm also quite curious to know about what this would be. So if you're exploring a source, ideally it should, if it's showing 10%, it should show you where that 10% is coming from. And if
it is showing me the source, but then in the filtering, if I take an option of excluding sources, then it will not show me again.
Okay, fine, got it.
And thereby the percentage of the plagiarism also decreases. Okay. But then is that an authentic way to do the?
No, it's not an authentic way for sure. I would say don't take that option. I would say
the only reason that we use that is I use that in IAs to remove things like consent forms, and when my students are using standardized instructions and that, because otherwise they get a report that shows you like, oh, it's 60% identical to another student. But so it's only, that's what I believe it's there for, so that you can remove standardized equipment and actually like standardized instructions and things that are supposed to be identical to get an accurate plagiarism report.
Correct.
Sorry.
So it would be there for think. No, that's totally okay, Ruth. Thank you so much for that. No, that's exactly what it is. But don't do it for the extended essay, I would say. Yeah.
Thank
We
you
have-
so much.
No problem. We have 3 more minutes left if we want to take like a last couple of sessions. Yeah, Ruth.
There is one other reason I would use it in the extended essay. Sorry, I just thought of this. When I've had a student submit a draft and then put their final version in, if you run both of them through Turnitin, it will
Oh.
show up as an identical report, and it
Yeah.
tells you that you plagiarized yourself. Just one to remember.
That's also accurate. Very good. This is also really helpful. That's it. Yeah. Any other questions? Otherwise, we can wrap up our section for today. And like I said, please feel free to put down your questions on the Padlet also going forth, and I can keep interacting with you over there. And I think someone had asked me for my email ID. So I'm just going to put it down in the chat in case you want to reach out for any further assistance. I would be happy to help. Great. Elsa, over to you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you once again for the wonderful session today. I'm sure everyone who joined in is taking away very useful insights. So that's about it.
Yeah, so this feedback is not just, I mean, my email ID is over here because I organized the event. So if there's any feedback that you have about the event also as a whole, you can always write to me on my email ID, and we use it for sure to, improve on the events that we have going forward. Yeah, and as one last thing, Elsa, you want to tell them about the closing session?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One last that is, we'll be taking 15 minutes of your time for a Toddle platform walkthrough to show you how Toddle can help you with the extended essay process at your school. It will take place at 12:45 p.m. GMT after the closing session. You can join the meeting through the link that I'm adding into the chat.
Yeah, I would highly recommend this link, guys. Like if any of you are interested, if any of you are librarians at your school or are interested in becoming extended essay coordinators, then this is really a good session. It's called the role of the librarian in the extended essay. So it's a 45-minute session, and after that we have 15 minutes of a Toddle walkthrough.
Also, we have a short survey for you to complete after this session, and we would like to hear back from you on how we can arrange the other sessions that are coming up.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Susan. Thank you once again.
Thanks, everyone. It was really nice to meet all of you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye.